Story 1. I grew up in a family that voted one way and one way only because that's what we do. My mom even admitted that she picked her political party because that was what her great-grandmother, who died when she was a teen, was. My mom still votes that way, but I don't think she realizes that her party is not what it originally was when she started voting. If you listen to her long enough, you realize that her ideals don't align with it. But she will never admit that. Ironically, most of the family in my generation is the opposite of what our parents are. Story 2. Voted for the Green Party to save the environment. The Green Party won. The Green Party did none of the things they promised and instead damaged the economy. I will never vote for them again. Story 3. I was raised conservative and spent 27 years in the military. I held retirement jobs with other conservatives. I considered myself a moderate conservative. After I was laid off from a well-paying job, I chose not to work. After a couple of months, I got bored and took a job stocking shelves in a local grocery store. Getting to know my coworkers really opened my eyes. These people were barely getting by. When I mentioned I needed a root canal, their response was that it would be cheaper to have the tooth pulled. Everyone was a paycheck away from homelessness, facing multiple bus rides to and from work and relying on Medicaid providers. I realized that a large portion of people were barely surviving, and things needed to change. The biggest takeaway from my awakening is that healthcare should not be tied to employment. I might step on toes here, but I fully believe that a parent needs to be home when the children are home. When my wife left work due to illness and was home when the kids got off the bus, there was a huge difference in their behavior and personality. Another belief I hold is that parents need to raise their children, not surrogates. Families matter. I don't care what makes up your particular family. That is none of my business or anyone else's. I had no idea I would touch a nerve. Thank you for all the feedback. Story 4. Tried to actually do research and talk to people of specific groups instead of consuming only what commentators and content creators told me. Story 5. I was raised in a very conservative area. I remember being told that the one girl in my grade who had Democratic parents was being abused because they were exposing her to those ideals. I am naturally an adventurer, so I went far away to college. Just meeting other people and cultures completely dismantled that entire structure within a year. Story 6. I went to college, met new people, and developed a profound sense of empathy. Joining the military later only strengthened my views. Story 7. I moved from the Republican Party to Independent because my party was ignoring and demonizing scientists and doctors in favor of religion and ideology, costing the lives and ruining the education of my fellow Americans. Story 8. In Canada, I have voted for 3 different political parties. Political affiliation should not be written in stone. I have voted with my heart and strategically. You should vote for what aligns with your current views, not based on party alone. Story 9. After the most recent presidential election, I changed my party affiliation from Democrat to undeclared. Not because I can see myself voting for a Republican, but because the Democratic Party needs to know that our confidence in them is badly damaged. Story 10. I became an adult and actually experienced the real world. I realized how shallow my parents' views of the world were. Story 11. In New York City, only Democrats win in my voting precinct, so the real race was the primary election, and only registered Democrats can vote in the primary. Therefore, I became a registered Democrat and always voted in the primary. Anyone running as a Republican was basically a joke. You were more likely to win as a Green Party candidate, and anyone with any sense knew this. Prior to this, I was not registered with any party because I am an independent who votes based on the candidate's positions, background, education, and criminal record. For example, one principle I hold steadfastly is refusing to vote for any felon, which prevents me from being a single-party voter. Similarly, in Texas, I frequently voted in the Republican primary, although this is not always the case because Democrats carry most of my local elections, and local politics are functionally more important to my life than state or federal politics. Additionally, your vote carries about 10 times the weight in the primary because so few people participate, even though it is often much more important than the general election. When I look at vote tallies for local politics, sometimes it has literally been my vote that made the difference. Story 12. I changed from Republican to Independent because I support fiscal responsibility and hold liberal views on social issues. I no longer recognize the Republican Party I once belonged to. Story 13. Well, I have always been independent, or rather had been until Bernie Sanders, so I registered as a Democrat to vote for him in the primary. The Democratic National Committee completely undermined that in the following months and years. I am now an independent again and no longer believe either of these parties is the way forward. As I see it, one party sold itself to the bankers and the other to the grifters. Time for some change. Story 14. When I was 18, I decided I was a libertarian thanks in large part to a high school teacher who introduced us to ideas through Ayn Rand's books. Then I turned 22 and realized that the social freedom aspect of the Libertarian Party was not accurate. Now I typically vote for the Democratic Party while wishing there were more progressive candidates. Story 15. Grew up a Republican in Oklahoma. Joined the Navy, met many people from all over the world, and fought alongside most of them. I fought against a few others. The one common trait the people I fought against had was a hypocritical view toward authority. It was bad unless they were the ones in charge. This mindset was common in my rural-raised parents, but not from my World War II veteran, overseas deployed grandparents, and I never understood it. Unfortunately, I saw it taking root in American society, pushed by people like Newt Gingrich, the National Rifle Association, the Moral Majority, and Fox News. What drove me to switch parties was Karl Rove. He was running the George W. Bush campaign, and during the 2000 South Carolina primary, he started spreading a false story that John McCain, a Vietnam War prisoner of war and descendant of a multi-generational Navy family, had fathered a black child in an extramarital affair years ago, an outright appeal to racists for their votes. In reality, the daughter was adopted from Bangladesh by McCain and his wife. So I was done. Before I could vote, McCain dropped out, but he was still on my absentee ballot, so I voted for him anyway. Then he hugged George W. Bush in a show of party unity, and I was enraged. I voted for every Democrat in every race in 2000, and they all won except for Gore and Lieberman. And let me tell you, Lieberman was a snake in the grass. It's been 25 years, and I have come to appreciate Will Rogers' quote. I'm not a member of an organized party. I'm a Democrat. We actually have a big tent, and it's like herding cats. But it beats racists, evangelists, accelerationists, and fascists. Story 16. Went from Democrat to Independent because the Democrats seem to base policy on feelings and slogans rather than doing the critical thinking necessary to solve problems in principled, sustainable ways. Story 17. I was a single-issue voter in my first election, coming from a religious background. After learning more about the world, including capitalism, healthcare, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues, I became a voter of the left and have never looked back. Story 18. I served my country in combat, came home broken, but found my way in law enforcement. I had a sense of brotherhood again and was helping people while also protecting them. All that shattered when Donald Trump was elected and empowered far-right radicals by not speaking against them. Suddenly, I was standing the line at protests and riots, being told to protect the cowards waving Nazi flags hiding behind the police. It kept getting worse as the far right felt more empowered, culminating on January 6th. Then he got elected again and pardoned those traitors. I can ignore all the other illegal actions this administration is getting away with and call it politics. But any party that continues to back a traitor who does not even try to hide it is not a party I want to be affiliated with. This is not the America I fought for and continue to fight for. It is time for a true independent candidate to come forward and bring us back to the land of the free. Until that happens, I will vote for the Democratic Party because the Republican Party has shown they are a party of hate and billionaires. Story 19. I was and still am a member of the Democratic Party, but I shifted from extremely left to moderate because there is a certain level of leftist orthodoxy where it is impossible to have an open conversation without being shouted down. My issue is not really with the ideas so much as the absolutism. There is no room for dissension. I feel that people who are extreme on either end of the spectrum have more in common with each other than with those who are more moderate. There is an attitude where there is no room for compromise, so we have to burn it all down. Both far right and far left express that kind of thinking. Story 20. I was raised in a Republican home and taught that large government was bad. As I got into adulthood, I served 8 years in the military. The irony of the military being a giant socialist organization while being full of extremely unsocialist people never escaped me. I then ended up doing very well for myself financially. I spent my entire life voting Republican for local and state elections, but generally voted for the person I thought would represent the United States to the world best. I voted for Gore, Bush, Obama, though I came very close to voting for McCain. While I had not completely moved to the left, I noticed that many of my views were aligning more and more with the left, such as gay rights and women's rights. Then I had a daughter who spent nearly 4 months in the neonatal intensive care unit. The day of her birth was the most stressful thing I have ever dealt with. Even with insurance, the cost to me was significant but manageable. That event clicked something in my brain. I remember having a conversation with my father a few months later where I said, if I have to pay a little more in taxes so that somebody else does not have to stress about money on what will definitely be the most stressful day of their lives, so they can worry about their family, I will do it. From that point on, I was mostly aligned with the left on everything but generally looked at both sides as unbiased as I could, though I generally voted left at that point. Then Trump happened. To this day, I cannot fathom how anybody with more than 2 brain cells would vote for him. Today, I am a firm believer that universal healthcare, universal education, and in the not-too-distant future, universal basic income are going to be things that must happen for this country to continue functioning. Story 21. I was fairly apolitical but identified as a Republican for 10 years. I switched to independent after their COVID-19 response and the first impeachment. I switched to Democrat after January 6th. Story 22. I changed from being a liberal supporter to being unaffiliated. I vote tactically in each election based on the particular candidate and the tactical benefit of preventing a worse candidate, but do not consider myself in allegiance with or endorsing those candidates. They are simply necessary evils, necessary because, in my judgment, they are the lesser evil. The reason is that I have seen many horrible conservative governments in my lifetime and thought that liberal governments would be a strong improvement. However, after experiencing liberal governments, I saw that the trajectory of society remained unaltered, and that left versus right is just a smokescreen that obscures the real conflict. The privileged few versus the disenfranchised many. Story 23. I originally registered to vote at 18 under a write-in party I created named Sweatshop Millionaires, but later registered as Democrat to vote for Bernie. With that said, I oppose a 2-party system. Story 24. I am pretty young, so I have not had a lot of time to get set in my ways, and I have never been affiliated with a particular political party. My priority in voting has changed due to the current political climate in the United States and my experiences after law school and practicing law. My main concern has shifted from social issues to procedural and less visible issues. I focus on who I think will cooperate and compromise to actually get things done. I also consider who is least likely to disregard and undermine our important legal procedures for lawmaking and administration, especially given some unfortunate and concerning trends right now. Story 25. I lean far more libertarian in my 30s than I did in my early 20s. A lot of the Republicans do not really support individual freedoms or smaller government. Story 26. Not sure if the question is about party affiliation or political stance. If party, changed it when the party shifted from espousing the dangers of government in a progressive manner, such as being pro-LGBTQ and focusing on the impact of policing on minorities, to when the party was taken over by edgy MAGA adjunct types who thought saying shocking things was the way to gain support. If political stance, coming into contact with radicals on every side made me realize that little by little progress is the way to go. Changed to basically be a centrist. Story 27. I attended a private school with many wealthy students who had little understanding of the world beyond their own bubble. In addition, a strict conservative civics teacher told me exactly which demographic to avoid permanently. Wealthy individuals do not enter politics to help others, but to increase their own wealth. Story 28. This is Reddit, so you are going to get only one type of answer, most of which are just creative writing exercises. I have not even looked at the thread yet, but I used to be conservative until is going to be like 95% of the responses. Story 29. We grew up conservative. But then I went to college and learned about empathy and social issues. I realized the world was bigger than my small, mostly white town and that other people mattered. Politics was basically one side fighting for hungry children and minorities, and the other side complaining about people being too aware. So it was easy to decide who was worth supporting. Story 30. I grew up in a group that preached political neutrality but would also repeat conservative talking points in private. It disillusioned me, to say the least. When I was able to move out, I started aligning with liberal views because at least they had valid points 20 years ago. But then, in 2016, I noticed that the way liberal individuals talked about straight, white, Christian people sounded exactly the same as the way conservative individuals talk about gay, brown, atheist people. But somehow, only liberal discrimination was considered acceptable. That is literal hypocrisy. Neither stance is okay. Of course, a certain political figure has made it so that anyone who disagrees with him, regardless of their preferred political view, sounds like a genius trying to bring sanity back to this country. Story 31. I moved from Democrat to Republican so that I could vote for the most moderate Republican options in the primaries. This was also in response to Republicans gerrymandering my state. Story 32. The initial appeal for the Democratic Party was that, on the surface, they seemed to be against bigotry. I eventually realized that this was merely a cover for their deep and operationalized hatred of particular races, ethnicities, and genders, and I am now politically isolated. Story 33. I became an independent when I realized that neither the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party saw me or other women as full human beings. I left the Republican Party at age 18 and the Democratic Party at age 42. I doubt I will ever join another political party unless things change significantly. Story 34. I became an independent. I was raised very liberal and taken to countless protests growing up. I thought it was great until I realized that if you have one differing opinion, you are demonized. I am socially very liberal but fiscally conservative, so being independent made sense. I do not want the government in my business, and I think taxes are ridiculously high. I also think you should be who you want, marry who you want, and live your life. Both Republicans and Democrats will argue this until they are blue in the face. It is crazy. Story 35. I actually started paying attention to things beyond the culture wars. I wouldn't call myself a staunch conservative before Donald Trump, but I definitely leaned that way, and most of it was over cultural issues that I simply didn't understand at the time. White privilege, for example, I thought was basically a slur implying that I had everything handed to me and invalidated all my hard work. I grew up very poor, so that resentment definitely contributed to my leaning conservative. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 made me start paying attention to policies and recognizing the hypocrisy of the Republican Party, and I have voted for the Democratic Party ever since. I even produce an animated YouTube show discussing politics. Story 36. While I have not read every one of the 205 comments at the time of reading, I am curious. Has anyone changed political affiliation from left to right? Every comment I read that mentions a switch is from right to left. Story 37. I was raised liberal and was very liberal until COVID. That changed everything, including seeing how my fellow liberals act when you have a differing opinion. Now I am libertarian and more right-leaning. I will never go back. That being said, both sides are full of it, do not have the public's best interest in mind, and are corrupt. Story 38. I have never been socially conservative, but when I was in my early 20s, I identified as a libertarian. This was mainly because I wanted cannabis to be legal, and I believed private companies would provide better and more affordable products in the long run. I also believed in rugged individualism, but thought that Americans would come together to fight a common enemy. My beliefs changed during President Obama's second term, and after seeing the response to COVID-19, my libertarianism faded. Now, I am neither a socialist nor a strong supporter of capitalism, somewhere between the two. I support universal health care and stronger labor unions. I am pro-choice and, while not actively protesting, I support LGBTQ+ rights, believing that Republicans should leave them alone. I strongly dislike Republicans and the Make America Great Again movement, and I am no fan of Democrats either. Although the United States political system is heavily influenced by the elite, I recognize that Democrats generally perform better in office than Republicans. Story 39. I grew up in a conservative Republican, religious Christian household. As I became an adult and learned more about other people's lives and struggles outside of the environment I was raised in, I realized that I could not be the Republican they raised me to be and also be the Christian they raised me to be. These two identities were becoming increasingly opposed. I chose Christianity, focusing on understanding the actual teachings of Jesus Christ and applying his teachings to my worldview. Personally, I present as fairly conservative in how I choose to live my life, but politically I am progressive because I do not believe that my personal beliefs and preferences should be forced on anyone else. Story 40. I don't believe in aligning with a political party to the point of affiliation. Vote on the issues and support candidates that most closely align with you on those issues. Frankly, I got tired of both major parties in the mid-2010s. Felt like they don't care about the average American. The last major party president I voted for was Barack Obama. Watching Bernie Sanders lose in favor of Hillary Clinton was very off-putting back then from the Democrats, and Donald Trump is Trump. No one has learned anything since then in either party, so I reject them all. Story 41. Voted Republican and was ready to do it again in 2008 for John McCain. I like John McCain and think he would have been a fine candidate. Then Sarah Palin was added to the ticket. Around the same time, the vitriol from the racist parts of the party started emerging. My hometown, Strongsville, Ohio, hosted a John McCain campaign stop. An early YouTube user filmed interviews with the people waiting to get in, and I had never been so disgusted by what I saw and voted for Barack Obama. Since that day, the Republican Party has drifted further and further to the right and has become fully unrecognizable. Story 42. I was a Republican who voted for George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992, my first election. A few years later, I would even listen to Limbaugh and other right-wing personalities over my lunch in the car. I never missed an opportunity to vote. I believed for many years that the Republican Party was economically better than the Democrats by a long shot. Fast forward to 2016, and Donald Trump won the nomination to cheers by basically every Republican I knew. I thought, this guy is a fraud and a nut. Not to mention completely unprofessional and definitely unpresidential. So I voted Libertarian for President Gary Johnson in 2016, but also Republican down the ballot. I couldn't imagine voting for a Democrat. Then in January, when Donald Trump took office alongside the rest of Congress, I witnessed the complete dismantling of our country's status, decorum, rule of law, you name it. And the Republican Party still supported this guy. From 2018 onward, I have voted Democrat 100% of the time and will never go back. The Republican Party is nuts. Story 43. I was a John F. Kennedy-style anti-communist Democrat. The party moved too far to the left. My position basically stayed the same. Story 44. Went from Democrat to conservative independent. Realized that I do not agree with Democrats on many moral issues. Story 45. I dropped my stance as a Democrat because they are complicit in everything I dislike. Of course, I vote for them because it is far worse with Republicans, but I am not a supporter at all and I call out the harmful actions they take. This has caused me to be more ostracized by the left than the right. I want a party where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the most conservative member, and that infuriates liberals the most. Go figure. It is not just okay, it is healthy to criticize bad behavior on your own team. Story 46. I am not sure if I would say I am Republican, but I have developed more of a distaste for the political left as I have gotten older. I grew up in a predominantly liberal area and have observed some narcissism associated with many on the far left. I find many of them to be hypocritical, pretentious, and disingenuous. I used to believe that anything associated with the left was the correct answer because that was how I was raised, but growing up and witnessing certain behaviors has made me rethink things. That is not to say that people on the far right are not obnoxious. I have simply been exposed more to the other side and have grown tired of it. Story 47. When I was 9, my mom committed petty theft and was caught. She used me as a mule to carry stolen goods. When the police caught her, they found a massive unlicensed revolver in her purse. After that, the judge said, "You live with your dad now." My dad did his best but was the black sheep of his family. They were a group of Jehovah's Witnesses. He did not want the sins of the father to affect me and still wanted to have a family. So he introduced me to the option of joining the Jehovah's Witnesses. The problem was I was about 9 or 10 at that time. I was used to doing what I was told, agreeing to anything because of my mom. I did not know what I was agreeing to, so I became a Jehovah's Witness. Many of their values do not align with mine as an adult. I quit being a witness around age 15. However, their anti-homosexuality mindset and many conservative ideals stuck in my mind. This was painful considering I grew up to realize I was a lesbian, often self-sabotaging. It was these trials I faced at a young age that made me realize I was not suited for conservative life. I had already been through the find Jesus style of pressure, which was poison for my teenage self. I know this was not what the original poster had in mind when they asked, since I did not have a concept of party affiliation at that age. But I personally consider the path I might have followed to be very parallel with conservative right-wing ideals if I had not gone through those trials, and that thought scares me. Story 48. Went from Democrat to independent after realizing how corrupt the Democratic Party is, letting billionaire political action committees write gun control laws in my home state, the way Sanders was treated, the way the homelessness issue is handled in Democrat-controlled cities, and how performative much of the party's empathy is when attending town halls and asking what my representative could do about migrant children being separated from their parents and put in cages. The nail in the coffin came when I asked for assistance from our state representative's office with a legal immigration issue our family was dealing with. A federal agency misplaced paperwork, and we were told we would not receive help unless there was an act of deportation, meaning help would not be provided unless we had done something illegal. Now I hate all politicians regardless of what badge they wear. Story 49. I basically left the Democratic Party after 2016 because they have gone too far left. I am old enough to remember that until roughly 1980, we had two centrist parties. By the time Joseph Biden was elected in 2020, the Democrats had become totally radical. I believe people should be able to live without high taxes, own guns, and build on their own property without endless environmental and zoning restrictions. Story 50. Raised conservative. Entered a pipeline but got stuck because of mental illness. Realized I was bisexual. Realized I was traumatized. Received therapy. Started talking to people. Started listening to people. Began seeing how people were affected. I am now a socialist. Story 51. I took advanced placement economics and realized that free trade was beneficial. I changed my political affiliation from Democrat to Libertarian. Although most libertarians would disparagingly call me a statist, I would consider them Republicans who use marijuana. Story 52. I used to be a Democrat, but it is safe to say that the party has left me rather than I left it. They are corporate slaves. The infighting and backstabbing they do to literally pick who gets to run as president regardless of the people's will has been the most depressing and disgusting thing to watch for the last 25 years. It feels like the Anakin meme with Obi-Wan by the river of lava. You were supposed to be the chosen one, followed by the party saying, "I hate you." Story 53. Grew up in a conservative environment. My parents influenced me into thinking that was the only way. I moved to the city as an adult and surrounded myself with many different kinds of people. I learned empathy along with much more about the world. I am never going back. Story 54. Winston Churchill was attributed with saying, "If you are not a liberal when you are 25, you have no heart. If you are not a conservative by the time you are 35, you have no brain." That was pretty much me, and that is why I changed my political affiliation to conservative. Story 55. Moved from a Democrat to an independent because the Democratic Party has villainized straight white males, and I am a straight white male. Story 56. You're a Republican, which means you should marry a Democrat. That way, you'll get information from both parties. Parents to me when I turned 18. I was registered as a Republican until 2014, I think. I changed parties when we moved. I started to see how much I was not the model of current Republican standards. Growing up, it was drilled into me that I should care about other people and take care of them. I feel like in the last 10 years or so, my parents' ideology that they impressed on me as a kid now comes with small print. Take care of people who are insert specifics. Story 57. Progressive my whole teen and adult life, but I have lived in several states. If the state is primarily Republican, I register as a Republican so I have a say in the primaries for the party that is almost certain to win. I have switched back and forth multiple times between the parties, but my guiding principles never change. Story 58. I grew up in a heavily conservative family. Over the years, more of their arguments, complaints, and opinions stopped making sense to me. Even the attitude toward employment, hard work, dedication, and loyalty get you ahead does not hold up in the real world. I realized that while the Democratic Party had its issues, it aligned much more with my sense of right and wrong. This was all before Donald Trump drove them straight off the cliff. Story 59. Real life happened. I got older and had to work hard for everything my family has, and I decided I was not okay with killing babies. Story 60. I dated a girl who opened my eyes to Republican nonsense. Donald Trump was the final reason that I will never go back. Also, becoming aware of the harmful actions giant corporations are taking against regular people like me has honestly motivated me to move further left than ever before. Tax the rich, Medicare for all, and free Palestine. Story 61. I have been a lifelong member of the Democratic Party. I would not say I have changed political affiliation, as I do not support the Republican Party, but I am beyond disillusioned and feel totally disenfranchised and unrepresented by the Democratic Party. I no longer consider myself a Democrat. If a Republican comes along who is legitimately anti-war and anti-Zionist, I will vote for them in a heartbeat. Story 62. I was a Republican into my early 30s. The first doubt appeared for me due to lies about Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. Then I started to notice more things that did not add up. Basically, I determined that the Republican Party was lying to get what they wanted, and I did not want to be a part of that. I voted for George W. Bush in 2000 and John Kerry in 2004. Then I have voted for Democrats ever since. Story 63. The escalator ride in 2015 was the end for me when I was a registered Republican who voted Democrat. January 6th made me an independent who voted Democrat. The reemergence in 2024 with the extreme behavior made me switch to Democrat. Prior to this, I worked on Republican campaigns and attended Republican functions with announcements. Story 64. I grew up Republican all my life, but then Make America Great Again happened. At first, the stupidity repelled me. I could not support ignorance. Then, after taking a step back, I realized I had been aligned with supremacists and Nazis. I still hold some old-school grand old party values, but Make America Great Again is not even a low-grade George W. quality of Republican. Story 65. Democrats stopped having real primaries. The issues that occurred in Nevada with Bernie Sanders in 2016, 3 of the top 5 candidates dropping out very early in the 2020 primaries on the same weekend, and then the events of 2024, which all the prominent Democrats still refuse to discuss. Edit. I changed my registration to unaffiliated. Story 66. The Republican Party used to be the party of personal freedom. The current people using the name are neither conservative nor do they support personal freedoms. It is all about money. The party left me. I did not leave the party. Story 67. This type of thinking is why we are where we are. What group do you align with? It is not at all about debating or critical thinking, just what side you align with now. What a joke. Story 68. I am European, raised conservative and Christian. I stopped both and left the conservative and Christian communities because they have repeatedly told me over the years that my existence is a mistake and that I need to die because I am asexual and have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Some people around me are very surprised that I refuse to associate with extremist groups that actively want me dead. I work against them and strive to keep them away from any sort of power. Story 69. The left has been in charge of my country since 1975, and we are now poorer than all of Western Europe and most of Eastern Europe. There is corruption, the highest rise in housing costs in the world, high taxes, the second highest business taxes in the world, and artificially low salaries that political parties allow to continue. People vote for the far right strictly out of spite, even though they do not agree with 90% of their policies. Story 70. I watched the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing. As a man, I couldn't accept that the party sharing most of my beliefs would try to ruin a man's life because a woman accused him of a serious crime without evidence. I watched for weeks as they continued to waste time and produce nothing. I would never be okay with losing my job because a woman lied to get me fired. That was my reason for leaving the Democratic Party. I am an independent now, but I would rather vote in a way that harms our country than give my vote to another Democrat. Story 71. Lifelong Democrat, now unaffiliated because of the extreme left ideology it has become. Also, the fact that they cannot present a strong candidate. Story 72. I went from being an unaffiliated vote for the candidate, not the party person, to a consistent liberal after the Republican Party declared war on voting rights in the 2010s. I do not care what your tax policies are if you do not believe in free and fair elections. Overall, politicians mostly perform poorly, and it should be as easy as possible to remove them from power if they do not do their job. Story 73 moved from center-left to the right because of the condescending, entitled, often delusional and self-righteous behavior on the left. Cannot even stand the person I used to be when I was influenced by that type of behavior. Story 74. I was raised in a Republican household, and from the time I was 4 or 5, I remember my parents vilifying the political left. My first election was for Barack Obama, and I voted against him, but I liked him as a person. During his second term, I switched to independent, and when Donald Trump came along, I became more liberal. Although I am still more moderate on fiscal policy, the lack of empathy regarding social issues was the main factor for me. The false support for Donald Trump from politicians on the right is a transparent attempt to avoid losing their base. Story 75. I made the vow that I would only vote if I took both political parties into consideration and found myself directly in the center. I fully supported Andrew Yang until he formed his own political party without any clear policies. Story 76. This is Reddit. Dude, you might as well change your question to people who changed to leftist or far leftist. Why did you do it? Story 77. I'm very liberal but was leaning conservative once I bought a house and started paying property, local, income state and federal, and a lot of sales taxes. Then Obama ran, and if he had lost and faded away, and the Republican Party of McCain and Romney had won and remained, I may have become an official Republican. But Trump happened, and I'm a Democrat for life. Story 78. I went from Democratic Party to unaffiliated because I do not want to be associated with any political party. I have felt I had to vote for Democratic Party in every election because our choices are so bad. Everyone is too right of center for me. I wish people did not identify by party, team, or tribe. Story 79. I grew up and realized that the world is not truly based on merit, and wealthy people are exploiting us all. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.